I want to kick us off with a brand new series this week. We're going to be learning about the story of a man named Joseph, and that story is found at the end of the book of Genesis, chapters 37 through 50. Many of you have maybe heard the story of Joseph. It's one of my very favorite stories, and he's one of my very favorite characters in the entire Bible. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn from the life that he lived. Before I tell you the story of Joseph, I want to let you know where we are in the world and what's happening. I want to tell you a little bit about Joseph's family. And you see, the world was a very messy place, and a lot of people made bad decisions and sinned. Maybe you're a little familiar, the world's still that way. But God decided he needed a family, a group of people, to be his representatives in the world, human beings that he could call his own. So he talked to one man named Abraham, and Abraham's family would be known in the future as the Israelites. This family were going to be God's chosen people. And so Abraham had a son named Isaac, and God's blessing went with him. And Isaac had a son named Jacob, and God's blessing went to Jacob. And then Jacob had 12 sons. Can you believe that? 12 sons. And one of them was Joseph. So Joseph is one out of a huge family. I don't know how many of you guys have big families, or maybe you're an only child. So if you have a big family, you might be able to relate to Joseph. Or if you're an only child, you might be very confused what it's like to live in a huge family. But Joseph was one of 12 brothers, which is pretty crazy. And something interesting is that Joseph was the favorite, his dad's favorite son. Jacob loved Joseph so much, and two things happened that made his brothers very jealous. First, you guys know that Jacob gave Joseph a very fancy, colorful coat because he loved him so much. So he gave him the coat. The second thing that happened was that Joseph would translate dreams. Okay? I don't know if you guys ever had some weird dreams. I've never translated a dream. But Joseph would translate dreams, and in some of his dreams, he told his brothers that he was going to rule over them someday. And they were very mad when they heard that. So with the coat and with the dream situation, tensions were very high. His brothers were getting really angry, and some of them even wanted to kill Joseph. They were so angry. And so what happened was, when Joseph was out checking on the sheep and seeing what his brothers were doing one day, they decided that they were going to kill him. But thankfully, Joseph's oldest brother talked them out of it. And what they did was they tied him up, threw him in a hole, and they sold him to these people that were traveling to Egypt as a slave. So Joseph's life is kind of messed up. And now, Joseph maybe was a little rude about the dreams, and maybe he rubbed it in a little bit, but did he deserve being sold into slavery and beat up and tied up? No, he didn't deserve that. And something that I want you to know, something that is true about life that is really hard for us to understand, is that sometimes things happen that are out of our control. Does that mean that God doesn't love us or God's not watching us? No, that's not what that means. That just means that we live in a broken world with sinful people, and sometimes they do things to us that we don't deserve. But God was still with Joseph. So now I want to take you into the next part of the story. Joseph sold into slavery. What happens next? Now Joseph was taken very far away from his home, all the way from where his family were dwelling in Canaan, all the way to Egypt, which is really far away. He was scared. He didn't know what was going on. He was betrayed by his family members. He was at a really low point. But the good news is that God was still with him. A man named Potiphar, who was a really wealthy, important man in Egypt, bought Joseph as a slave, and Joseph came and worked in Potiphar's house. And the interesting thing was that Joseph was a very unique guy. Because of his faith in God, he loved God and trusted God with his life. Because of that, God gave him many gifts, and he gave him wisdom, and he gave him many abilities. And Potiphar trusted Joseph over his entire household. After a while, Joseph was in charge of the whole house because he was so wise. And a verse I want to read for you that kind of speaks to this is Proverbs 2, verse 6. It says, "For the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding." And the second lesson I want us to learn today is that faith in God and trusting him gives us true wisdom. And Joseph's life and his story is a great example of this. Because he trusted in God, God gave him wisdom, and he knew truth about things. He knew how to run a great household, and that's why he rose in the ranks of Potiphar's house. So we see Joseph's life starts out really messy and terrible, but because of his trust in God and his faith, it ends up working out for him here in Potiphar's house. But you guys probably know that's not the end of the story. And in the next couple weeks, we're going to dive into what happens next in Joseph's life. It's a crazy story. lots of ups and downs in his life. So that was week 1, but I want you guys to think about where Joseph is in the story. He started off at a really low point where his brothers, beat him up, tie him up, sell him into slavery. Life was terrible for him, but God was still there, and he was able to see it through, and his life was able to get back on track. And I want you to think about times in your life when you felt like nothing was going your way, things were terrible, you felt like you're treated poorly. And it's all about perspective. If you look back on those times, God was still there. He still carried you through. You made it to the end. And no matter what you go through, God is still there. Never feel like he abandoned you. Joseph learned as he went through his life that God was still there. And we're going to see this in week 2 and 3 as we continue on in this series focusing on Joseph. We're going to see just how much God took care of him, even though his life was crazy at times with the ups and downs and the different things that happened to him. So look forward to that. Week 2 and week 3 are coming up soon. But there you go. That's it for this week. We learned about Joseph starting with his family, being sold into slavery, and now rising to the rank over the whole house in Potiphar's house. So there you go. Thanks for watching.